Hey gang, today I wanted to take you through my process for a heavy metal minimalist style Lamenter. I'll make more for other legions, chapters, and factions, and cover theory like lighting and composition, all here on this channel. Step 1. Base coats. Lamenters are 100% yellow, so I'm just going to show you how to do the yellow with as much explanation I can, and then how to do the shoulder checkerboard at the end. So start off with painting your entire mini with ash grey from the army painter. If you prefer Warhammer brand paint, then Administratum grey is the most similar. If you've seen my Imperial Fist video, you'll notice that I started the yellow with a bright pink. For Lamenters, we're looking for a more cold yellow, so starting with this grey instead, we'll keep the yellow more New York taxicab, rather than the Imperial Fist slightly dehydrated golden piss yellow. This also makes the base coat very simple, as we can also use that ash grey on the other shoulder pad that we're going to do the checkerboards on. Try and make the coverage for this layer flat and uniform. This will help in step 3, as patchy base coats may show through the top coat later, especially when using yellow paint, which is notoriously tricky and translucent. I talked about this a bit in the Imperial Fist video, but basically how yellow paint is kind of odd compared to other paint flavors. It has the same pigment load as other paint, but yellow pigment tends to be less opaque, and so needing more layers of it to create a solid wall of color. To help with this, I tend to water it down a fair bit and just do multiple layers of thinned yellow until it's uniform. You could do one thick layer, but I find that yellow paint goes sticky rather fast, so it can be hard to avoid brush streaks and messy textures. I don't like to use phrases like "you must water your paint down to milk," because what does that even mean? Every time you use a different paint, you basically need to start from scratch to how much water you want to add. I find with some colors like reds, I barely add any water, but with blues, I add more. It just depends on the translucency value each pigment has and how it reacts to your water. For example, with white, I like to add more water to white, but I have to find the balance between how much I can add before it just turns into clumpy limescale. So yeah, it's just trial and error. Add as much or as little as you need to make the paint flow easily for you. I come from traditional canvas and board painting, so I prefer using thicker paint. You might prefer working with thinner paint and doing more layers. I will say, if you're like me with thicker paint, then just be careful you aren't filling in details and losing them. But yeah, carry on all over with the grey until you have a pale grey little man. Step 2. Nuln Oil. This bit does not need to be careful. Just slop it on, puddle it in the edges and recesses for darker shadows, and try and do entire panels as a few strokes as you can, otherwise you may get tide lines as it dries. Make sure to properly shake your Nuln Oil for a minute, as I've had a couple times I didn't and it's dried glossy because I didn't mix in the pigment enough with the medium fluid. While this dries, make a cup of tea and think about how even though everyone looks down on your chapter because they seem unlucky and tragic, at least they don't look down on you for the fact your Primarch died to a bald man in front of his dad who didn't love him. Like this video, subscribe, and potentially become a channel member to get exclusive channels in my Discord where I post photos of my kitten and take requests for tutorials to make. I also stream painting on here and Twitch if you want to hang out and ask questions, or watch me be bad at Space Marine 2 or other games. Step 3. Top coats. For the main colour, I'm using Demonic Yellow by the Army Painter. Warhammer Flashgitz Yellow is the alternative. For this layer, you want to water down your yellow and do thin layers over the grey, leaving that millimetre or half millimetre gap to any edges or corner creases. Having this thinned down will help you keep that cold tint from the undercoat showing through the yellow, and also help with being able to control where you're putting the paint. Be sure to let each layer dry before doing the next, as doing the next thin layer too soon will move the paint that hasn't dried yet and may make a textured mess on the panel. There's only highlights over this, so make sure you like the coverage that you do here. Again, on parts that are up against the wall on another panel, I leave about a millimetre between my top coat and the crease so I can have a dark outline to separate the panels a bit and save me from accidentally going up those walls that should be left dark. If you leave the coverage kind of patchy and uneven, this can look more battle-worn, and you can use the brushstroke lines and patchinesses to help plan out any weathering or battle damage that you want to add. I don't really do battle damage, and this isn't a tutorial for that. And with the yellow, this can look kind of weird. So I recommend just keeping it kind of flat looking and uniform so it looks nice and new and clean. Be most careful in the recessed armor, such as on this arm, under his elbow and wrist plate, to not get the brighter top coat on the perpendicular sides of the extruded surfaces. I'm still trying to keep that millimeter border on the inside corners, but don't worry too much where the gap gets too thin, as long as those perpendicular sides stay clean and dark. I recommend pick a plane to be the top, and then perpendicular sides dark over the whole mini. If you want to have some extra depth, you can leave any down or backward facing surfaces with not top coat, and to use the top coat color as highlights as per step 4 on those faces. For the checkerboard pauldron, I'm using Army Painter Matte White or Warhammer White Scarf for this. Again, just go up to the corners, leaving that gap so you get a nice outline around this panel to separate it from the trim. Like the yellow, I'm watering this down just enough so I can manipulate it nicely on the shoulder, but not so much that it's gone clumpy and chalky. This depends on your water hardness and the pigments used in the paint. If you need more of an explanation of this, I recommend watching step 1 of my White Scars tutorial. I'll link it here, as I explain a bit more of the chemistry around white paint and why it sucks to use. I will also be doing a more in-depth sciencey video on water and how it affects paint once I'm done with these heavy metal tutorials. Step 4. Highlights. I'm using Ice Yellow by the Army Painter. From Warhammer Paint, this is Dawn Yellow. Very simply, you just want a pale yellow. If you don't have these paints and you have white, then you can just add a small bit of the yellow top coat paint you used to the white that you just used on the pauldron instead. So here I'm essentially outlining all my top coat panels with outside edges, or like on this elbow panel, a sculpted edge in the middle. Because we're doing these over the top coat, if you make a mess, we can go back over this later with more top coat color. Again, try and not slip up onto the dark areas as it will be harder to fix. Also because we did the top coat in thin layers to keep that coldness from the grey base coat. Any corrections you do this way may cover up more of the grey that you saved, so be a bit careful on this layer. If you want more depth, only do these edge lines on front and top facing edges, but I'd only recommend this if you also did this with the top coat as well, like I mentioned previously. Otherwise, go all over and edge up all the cliffs and sculpted edges. I tend to water down my paint a bit for this, so I can just use a smaller brush so the paint doesn't dry before I put it on the mini. If you find the edges look too pale or stark, mix in some of the top coat until you find a shade you're happy with. Adding more top coat will lead to more subtle edges, which can be nice if you then use the unmixed highlight paint to do some dot highlights on the corners. This is probably the bit that took the longest, as I wanted to be careful to not have to redo highlights, and to get the thinness of edge lines that I wanted. If you're going to do an entire army in this style, I probably wouldn't recommend sub-assembling like this, but it can help. If you're going into a fully built and glued mini, only do step 3 onwards on bits you can reach. This will by accident make a nice shadow area behind guns and underarms that will make him look a little more dramatic and lit. With subassembly, you can get every surface to look flat and uniform with lighting, so ending with a more cartoony or classic heavy metal result. On the trim, I'm treating this more like metallic, so I tend to pick outer edges or corners to highlight, and then a secondary bright spot if I feel like it needs it. Try and feather out these highlight spots to avoid harsh tide lines. Step 5. The checkerboard. You don't need to freehand this, to be honest. Just go on Amazon and search for geometric nail stamping plates. There will be many and they're very cheap. Just find one that has a checkerboard in it. It'll probably be on a plate with hazard stripes and some other funky patterns. I used to just use these like 4 years ago when I started Warhammer painting, as I already had them, so I would recommend. Just watch some how to use nail stamp videos. I can also make one if that would be helpful. There is an old video on my main channel that I can link here also, where I go through various things like using makeup powders and nail art supplies to level up your minis with cheap stuff instead of needing to buy the same product but with the made for minis markup. I give a little tutorial on how to use these stamps on there. And as a disclaimer, you can obviously only use nail varnish made for stamping with these plates. Acrylic paint that you used on your mini will not work, and regular nail varnish will just make a mess. I will link to some plates and varnish in the description. I will post UK and US Amazon. If you're in Europe, you'll have to find them yourself, otherwise I'll need to list like 20 odd countries and make it super long in the description. Also get some matte varnish to put over the top, as it will be shiny. Okay, so if you don't want to do that, and you do want to paint them on, you need watered down black and watered down white for fixing. Thin your black paint enough to be able to make lines like you're using an ink pen. You don't want to cause a flood, but you don't want to make a 3D ridge. I started with a circle to hold the red heart. I made this as big as I wanted so I wouldn't have trouble fitting the heart in too tiny of a space. After I was happy with the sketch shape, I just did it a couple times over to lock in the black. Then I cleaned this up with the white paint. For the checkers, I always start with finding the center at the bottom and filling in a square. I make it as wide as it looks normal with the height to the circle or maybe a little thicker, and then I take my thin black paint and draw a line parallel to the trim on either side of the circle. You can either do this directly from the top of the center square or a little further around the circle, like I have done, so the circle looks like it's cut a bit off the top of the center square. I eyeball the rest of these horizontal lines, trying to keep them the same height as the first row. Next, I go along on either side of the original center square on the bottom row and pull downwards with my brush to eyeball the other squares on. I did them a little odd to the size of the pauldron, so you'll see I do these tiny little segments up the edges. I wouldn't need to do this if I planned a bit harder, but I prefer to just eyeball it. After I'm happy with where I've put these, I just do another layer or two of the thinned black to lock them in. Now find the center spot at the top of the pauldron panel. You now want to pull your brush with thin black, starting at the outermost squares from the middle, drawing lines up to that top center spot. These will end up making more triangular squares and then triangles at the top. If you start from the edgemost squares, then you should be able to keep that outer line fairly parallel to the trim side. Then work your way along each row, filling these in and correcting with white as needed. Then for the heart, find a red paint that you like. I'm just using pure red from Army Painter, but you might enjoy a darker red or a more scarlet shade, so this is up to you. For the heart, again find the vertical center for the base of the heart and then pull the paint up into a V and fill in the lobes to get the shape you want. This can be a bit of a struggle, just use the white for correction as much as you need. Then for the little drip, I don't worry about the shape and I just kind of sploot it on. The rest of the owl. From this video, learn the things, put it to use on the rest of the mini. This style is good for quick, consistent minis that look good with only a handful of paints. In total, this arm took me about 15-20 minutes, not including the Nuln Oil drying tea break. When I painted the rest of the mini afterwards, it took about the same time as the single arm, maybe a little bit longer, as it's a very simple process that's meant to be fast to do. This is my fully finished Lamenter Infernus Marine. Again, you can use transfers or the nail stamps I'll chuck in the description, but I'm just lazy and I don't have a transfer sheet for him to use. If you do use transfers or nail stamps, remember to use matte varnish over the top to get rid of that shininess. And here is a list of all the things I used in this video. I'll make more videos for the lenses, various guns, and freehanding hacks, so don't panic if yours doesn't look like mine. I don't tend to use transfers, but I can cover those in a video as well if needed. As always, thanks for watching. Check out my other hobby content or my dumbass gaming content on the main channel. Like, sub, leave a comment how you got on, Discord is in the description, and see ya.